I can recall much more of what I've read. Welcome to Admission Lab. I'm Professor Fang. Admission Lab helps you or your child to study smart and get into Ivy League schools. Today, I want to share you with one of the most powerful and universal learning technique. It is something that very successful learners use, whether they realize it or not. That technique is called review. You might also heard it as a revision or recall or memory retrieval. It sounds simple, but don't let that fool you. This is a game changer. So think about it. In school, we attend school maybe 5, 6, right? We were taught math, science, foreign languages, history, those kind of things. Everything except one thing, which is how to study, how to learn, right? Most of us rely on our instinct, based on some trial and error, and people do well, other people struggle. Often the biggest difference comes down to one thing, which is learning habit. And one of the most fundamental learning habits is what? You guessed it, reviewing what you have learned, right? But not just the rereading or rewatching passively. I'm talking about actively recalling information after some time has passed and re-express it in your own word. That's when knowledge really sticks. Okay, today I will going to teach you 2 techniques to improve your reviewing. Technique 1, turn learning into Q&A. I'll give you 3 examples of integrating this technique into my study. One of the most effective reviewing strategy is to turn what you learn into questions and answers. So say when you're reading a book, right? A lot of people read for hours and hours thinking, wow, this was great, right? Some of the books that we really like, right? But then after they read, they can't recall any single detail, maybe 1 or 2 at the most. For example, when I was young, I read a book for like 3 hours and really enjoyed it. But afterward, it seems like nothing stick, right? So that's kind of frustrating. So then I adapt this habit, which is what? Every 5 minutes or so, I close my book and I ask myself, what did I just read? That's a very generic question. You start reviewing in your mind, actively retrieving information without looking at the books, right? Say, oh, I read this. Maybe you realize you missed something, you reread. And then I keep going. It only takes a very short moment for reviewing, but it makes a huge difference. I find that after I adopt this asking my question every 5 minutes and retrieving information for 20 seconds, I can recall much more of what I've read. Another example is that if I study technical material, like textbook or something for exam, I can even write practice questions. I make questions. I often write down questions today for my future self to answer tomorrow or next week. Then when I revisit my note, right, it feels like a challenge for my past self. Hey, remember this? Something very clear in my mind, some derivation very clear, or some internal connection between different knowledges, that is very clear today, may not be clear tomorrow, right? So the question I put here is for future self. Maybe a week later, I look at the question and say, oh, I have no idea. And then I start to actively think, retrieving information, right? The third example of turning, reviewing into Q&A is, note-taking. I used to take pretty notes because that looks good, right? Neatly written, color-coded, but I really look at them again, in detail at least. Now my notes are more like short quizzes. Instead of copying definition, formula, derivation, right? I try to, recreate them from memory. For example, if I read a derivation, I think, oh, that makes sense, very interesting ones. and then I want to keep it, so I take a note, I copy them, even do a lot of footnotes saying, oh, going from here to here, I use the definition of what, right? But now different, right? I think, oh, this revision makes sense, and then I close my computer or close my book and take my notebook. I do it myself. Of course, I will be stuck, and then I'll go back to look at it and keep doing it. So that the purpose is not taking notes, is to turn the note-taking to a quiz, which is a question, right? So I find this very helpful. These 3 examples: one, reading books, give question for future self, and note-taking as a quiz, right? Technique 2 of improving the reviewing is space and interleaved practice. Another way to improve your reviewing session is to interleave subjects. For example, you are studying physics. It's easy to burn out after an hour, let alone you have to learn it for 8 hours a day. But the better way is you switch between 2 subjects. For example, you plan to study 8 hours a day. It's a very hard day, right? You spend 1 hour study physics, and you have a short rest. Instead of keep going with physics, you have enough. That's coherent enough, right? And then you study, for example, something else, history or English writing for 1 hour. And then you rest. For the 3rd hour, you go back to physics. Then something magical happens. In that short break, which is your learning of history or English writing, right? This short break gives your brain time to forget just enough of the physics that you learned. So when you return to physics, you are forced to retrieve information again and then keep going. That extra effort strengthens the memory. Don't be afraid to mix up subjects throughout the day. But the caveat on this is that don't mix many subjects in a day. Maybe 2 to 3 is good enough. The similarity of the subject should be away. They should not be very similar. And also, don't shift every minute, right? Shift after a decent amount of time. Shift subjects after learning for a decent amount of time, say 1 hour, 2 hours, things like that. Okay, the final thoughts. The review for today. Reviewing, we have 2 main techniques. Turn your learning into question and actively retrieve the answers. Whenever you can turn something into a question, turn it. And also, interleaved review. Revisit the material over time and mix subjects to improve your retention. Okay, that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed it. If you like it, please subscribe. I'm Professor Fang. I'll see you next time.